Our top story, another wild 24 hours in the presidency of Donald Trump, but this time really close to home. Out of the blue, he suddenly announced he'd had a phone call with Vladimir Putin, and the two of them were going to negotiate a deal to get peace in Ukraine. But the Defence Secretary of America says, but that means that Ukraine will have to concede territory to Russia, territory the Russians have taken with their invasion. European leaders say, we want to be involved in these negotiations. Currently, they're cut out, while the Americans say, but you're going to pay for it, you Europeans. We're not paying for defence and security in Ukraine or wider Europe anymore. I mean, it's kind of throwing up in the air years, decades of American-European relations. What's going on?
Well, we're going to have to get used to this roller coaster, aren't we? Because there's going to be... We're going to wake up on so many mornings and there'll be another announcement from the White House. Look, I think everybody wants to see that war come to an end. We've quite rightly shown solidarity and given steadfast support to Ukraine. There's got to be a negotiated peace in the end, but this has huge implications for the future security of Europe. So we've got to get ourselves in that room, but absolutely.
He said, didn't he, that he would end it on the first day. He hasn't quite managed that. But I thought yesterday some of the things for us here in the UK that were interesting were absolute clarity that America's not putting boots on the ground at any point ever, ruling out, you know, Kyiv ever being allowed to join NATO, which they may have wanted to and be part of, and a sort of really clear Europe, you're going to have to deal with this. We've got an ocean between us and them. You haven't.
So this is
so
typical.
It felt very much...
Yeah, this is typical Trump. He's very clear, he's very transactional, and the thing I think that he loves doing is meeting the strong man. You know, he wanted to meet Kim Jong-un, North Korea. He thinks if he can deal with people one-to-one, and this is clearly what's happening with Putin. The bad news is that he's just cut everyone else out, because he thinks that if he can...
If it works, do we care?
Well, the problem is because the problem is you're not getting a full conversation. If you're going to deal with, trying to bring peace between two warring factions, you've got to speak to both of them. You can't just speak to one of them and say, OK, this is the deal and we're going to sell the deal to the other guys.
I'm sure he's also talking to Zelensky.
I think he is, but he's not saying that he is. He's clearly making a demonstration of the fact that he's back in office, he's talking to the big player. And they're going to. And the implication is they're going to do a sort of deal.
The thing you have to think about is, what is in Putin's mind? Putin invades Ukraine, takes territory. If he now is told by Donald Trump, well, keep it.
Yeah.
No cost to him. Then why doesn't he do it again?
Well, exactly.
All across the border of Eastern Europe with Russia, other countries are thinking, well, if you can do that to Ukraine. Are we next?
Well, we have to see what the deal is. We're running a bit ahead of ourselves because we don't know what the deal is going to be.
Right. But we may not know if European leaders aren't in the room.
Well, exactly. That's why we need European leaders in the room, isn't it? Because it has these huge implications for us. When what is next?
But the
Estonia, Lithuania,
the way
Poland.
he does this, because he's creating drama, and that's why we're talking about it.
Well,
tweets.
You say that, but I'm just, putting the other side, which is that he's prepared to talk to Putin. We haven't got anywhere, and we're coming up very close to, aren't we, the anniversary of the start of it, 3 years. And, a lot of people have died. So is it worth just letting him do his thing and seeing where we are?
Look, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you can talk and get this conflict resolved, that is a good thing. But in the end, you're saying to a country, the Ukrainians, who have lost a lot of lives as well, lost a lot of their men who have been fighting, that what was it all in vain? They're giving up a lot of territory and they're not allowed to join NATO, which is about their future security as well.
And I think their concern is that he didn't respect the borders before and they didn't have a single day within that ceasefire where they weren't firing at Ukraine.
What was ominous for the Ukrainians was the fact that the Defence Secretary said they're going to have to abandon the idea that they'll get back to the 2014 borders. So both of those things taken together are not a very good sign for, our friends in Ukraine.
But it's also been the case for the last 70 years that America and Europe, through NATO in partnership, have worked together to keep Europe secure after the Second World War. And that has always had a big American military presence. And what they're saying is, that's finishing for us. In fact, we should hear the new American Defence Secretary
Yes, good
talking
idea.
yesterday about it being over to Europe to now manage their own defences because America has got other priorities. The full stop and then but were slightly contradictory there because Donald Trump, of course, was speculating about whether America would withdraw from the NATO alliance when he was a candidate for the presidency. The Defence Secretary says they're not going to leave, but he is absolutely saying that the money now has got to come from Europe, not from America, not just in Ukraine, but more widely. It's a massive challenge to defence budgets right across Europe.
Of course, and there's that old phrase, you might not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. I mean, look, we are going to have to make big decisions in this country about defence, but that has implications as well for other public services, because we know the public finances are very tight. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has got to make big decisions around the future of the NHS, the future of policing, the future of schools, and now she's also going to have to look at putting more money into defence as well.
I think on this question, I think Trump did have a point. I mean, in his first administration, he said, we can't bankroll this whole thing forever. And Germany and other countries, they're rich countries, and they were spending a lot less than the 2% that is actually required as a guideline of spending. So he came in and said, look, you guys are not pulling your weight, and you've got to spend more money. And I think there was a general recognition that he had a point.
So how about your former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who has been a huge supporter, while Prime Minister, for Ukraine? I mean, he would absolutely not have said Ukraine should give up the territory the Russians have taken, nor would Rishi Sunak, nor would Keir Starmer. Donald Trump just says it. Do we just accept it? I mean, is Ukraine essentially being told...
The view on this, the suspicion is that they're being sold down the river. That's the broad suspicion. And we just have to wait and see the terms of the deal. But the NATO point is a slightly different one from Ukraine. I mean, you know, saying that, OK, we're part of a club and you've got to pay your club fees, it seems reasonable to me. Whereas, obviously, you know, if you're going to just have a conversation with Putin, come up with a deal and then try and sell that to Ukraine, I don't think that's the right way of going about it. So I think he's wrong on Ukraine, but I think he has got a point on NATO spending and NATO budgets.
Interesting. Well, WhatsApp messages, this fraught group that we've been discussing, you've been discussing, haven't you, every day on the show on Good Morning Britain. I think people will be shocked because there's something about a reference to the Queen that's dismissive, which cuts into people's souls somehow, doesn't it? And these messages are there, and it seems to relate around... There it is on the screen. It does seem to relate around a visit to Parliament, expressing that it was slightly crazy that a 93-year-old woman should be dragged around a dusty old building, then saying, why is she using a lift? I saw her out riding. And then a comment comes back, she's just lazy. Now, I mean, that is going to really upset people on a really sort of emotional level, I think, because that thought would go through people's minds about the late Queen. The one thing we know she wasn't was lazy at 93, you know, goodness me. So what is going on with this? How serious is it?
Well, I was going to say, look, I mean, they're awful messages, disgusting messages. Like you and like your viewers, I was a massive, massive admirer of the Queen. I remember meeting her when I was an MP, when she came to Leicester. It was one of the most exciting days of my time as an MP. The two Labour MPs involved in these messages have been suspended by the Labour Party. Yes. And the Labour Party has quite clearly said it's not acceptable. We will have no truck with these sorts of comments. There's other... there's slightly racist, anti-Semitic messages in there as well.
Really,
so it's right that they've been suspended.
About other members of Parliament that people hold very close to the heart.
This is completely mad. I mean, I thought reading it was like from those old comic books, like the Beano or something, or Viz. I mean, it was just completely crazy. And why these people thought that they could get away with writing it on a WhatsApp was, to me, insane.
It's insane, but also, why would they want to say it at all? Now, is there an argument that people say things down... We used to say down the pub, didn't we? You know, people would banter down the pub, they would make jokes which were a bit much, which, because they were amongst friends, was sort of understood. We don't tolerate that, do we, anyway? No. But is there an argument that it's part of that, and does that excuse it?
Well, yeah, it's clearly laddish sort of banter, people showing off you know, with their mates. But, you know, these guys were public officials.
Yeah.
They're elected public servants. And the WhatsApp technology, I mean, that's once you've put it out there, anyone can screenshot it and leak it.
It is interesting, though, isn't it? Because, you know, there was no WhatsApp messaging when I was a Member of Parliament. It's all something which has happened since 2015. There are lots of different political groups. This was a local one in Manchester, but there will be...
That's right.
I'm sure, Kwasi, you remember lots of WhatsApp groups.
You know what? I never wrote anything on those WhatsApp because...
I'm sure you didn't.
Because I knew it would be leaked, and they were always leaked.
But how often did you see people writing things in those WhatsApp groups and think, why are you writing that down? This is unwise, it's odd, that's weird, that's things which you wouldn't normally...
That's wrong as well. I think that's what people who aren't in the groups and don't understand politics object to, that people are saying it anyway.
And they're showing off to their friends.
Yeah.
And all it takes is anyone can
screenshot... It's not politics, is it? It's
true. It's wide.
Yeah, on WhatsApp groups, they write weird things down, send weird pictures.
Yeah, weird pictures. There's all...
It's everywhere.
What is it about WhatsApp where people think it's safe?
Just remembering what I got and thought, oh, I'm coming off this group.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's always stories every so often, like, you know, police officers will get caught for sharing offensive, sometimes racist things on WhatsApp groups.
The thing that was about that, though, was, I think at the time, was that we realised that was a way of uncovering deeply disturbing behaviour, not just comments. And I think that's what's disturbing about this. It's not just the ill-advised stupidity of it, which you could argue, you know, politicians in much later profession maybe are stupid as anybody else. It's what it shows about mindsets, I think, that really disturbs me.
So, look, I think the mindset issue is they're goading each other on. So I know Andrew Gwynn, not particularly friendly with him, but he was always, you know, seemed very polite and sort of a convivial guy. And then you read that stuff and think, what is going on in your head?
It's quite odd.
It is weird, but I think they're kind of showing off. They're trying to... But why they would put that in that WhatsApp chat is...
We had a minister on yesterday. I asked him whether he had checked all his WhatsApp messages for the last 10 years, because, you know, now... And he said, well, there are some groups, he said, where I mute the chat.
Yeah, no.
But I'm afraid muting the chat isn't good enough. I mean, if you're on these chats and things are being said and you stay in the group, Keir Starmer has now said, you know, you're responsible. The 11 councillors have all stopped being... Labour councillors now, as a result. It's not because they were necessarily writing bad things down. They were just on a group and didn't do anything about it.
Is there a change here that, you know, let's look at X, formerly Twitter. You know, there is a lot of stuff on there which is horrifying and toxic, but I haven't come off it yet because I use it to monitor. Is there an element that people have got confused about these groups? They think, well, I'm in the group and I'm listening to what's being said and I'm part of it and maybe at times there's good information on it, but they don't realise there's something implicit about that choice, which is damning.
Well, I mean, these groups are usually workplace colleagues. They should be treated as professional groups. Now, so you might remember, like, 25 years ago when we all started really using email in the office.
Yeah.
I remember sometimes people would send around pretty inappropriate emails, and I remember, because I used to be involved in trade union activity, going to seminars where people were given advice about what is the appropriate thing to do with emails. And I think it's the same thing. This is not a group of friends. These are professional colleagues, and there should be standards that everyone should adhere to. At the time, I've never been in a WhatsApp group where I've seen racism and anti-Semitism, but you do see on some of these MP groups just sort of, frankly, sort of drivel, sort of.
But
you know,
what I find so
think, why are you putting that down
question
there?
is, how guilty are you if you're on the group?
Well, Keir Starmer says you are. Keir Starmer says you are.
I think that's...
I mean, it will send chills down the spine of every person in a WhatsApp group. Because I think, has there been something said by somebody else?
Exactly.
Which I...
And you're not in control of what you're being sent. I mean, you know, you can get sent pretty nasty things, but you're not responsible for that.
Well, but apparently you are now. If you are a Labour MP and you're in a group and somebody has said something and you didn't act... Then that's... I mean, we'll see. I don't think it's the case that these 11 councillors all sent terrible messages. They were just in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have balance. I mean, I can perfectly
understand that
you think
Keir Starmer made a mistake? Or
well, no,
has he created a rod for his own back?
No, because there's going to be an inquiry and an investigation. But I imagine for some of them, if you're in a group and you didn't see it, you're not really engaging with the group, look, that's different. But that's very different to somebody making a racist comment and you respond with a thumbs up emoji.
Yeah.
I mean, there's different levels of engagement in this, isn't there?
But what you're saying is very interesting. He's saying that by mere fact of being on the group, then you're kind of implicitly guilty.
Well, I think that is the current situation this week, and it's one of those things where you have to really know, what the implications are of that. Because as you said, even if your messages get deleted, what's clearly happened here is somebody who was on that group has taken copies of them.
That's right.
Yeah, indeed.
Given them to the Times newspaper now, gave them to the Mail at the weekend. I mean, the chat may have gone.
That's right.
But a message is a message, and if there was a screenshot, it's there.
Right. The screenshot takes a second, right? And then once you've got it, it's there forever.
Yeah.
I know. I hope you two have checked your WhatsApp messages.
You're going to be going through and trawling.
We did 24 hours.
Well, I've been looking at all the ones you've sent me, Edwin.
Shocking. We have Matthew Petticock on the show a little bit later on to talk about housing. I'm sure we'll talk to him about many other things as well. But what do you think of the latest announcement? So a huge number, 100 potential locations for this new builds, new towns. No statement on when and no statement on where. So there'll be a lot of people thinking, where's this going to be? Do I really need this or want this? There'll be a lot of people saying, hurrah, because we need this and we need it to boost the economy. But I guess until the shovels are in the ground, we don't know, do we?
Yeah, but we need more housing, and I think it's a great idea to build these new towns across the country. I think in one of the newspapers there's a list, they're talking about areas near Norwich and Carlisle and Reading, I think. I think Keir Starmer was with the King earlier this week looking at one of the new towns that the King himself has personally been involved in and sponsored. Yeah, I think we've got to get on with this. We need the houses, but of course, wherever we build the houses, we've got to make sure that there's the public services alongside them.
Right.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember all the decades of Mickey taking about Milton Keynes. Now, Milton Keynes is a lovely place to live. I've got friends in Milton Keynes, but it's taken a long time to get it to become a community with all the facilities and the sort of atmosphere and bonding that's needed to make that work. So are we potentially building strange wastelands that nobody will live in?
I think I agree with John on this. We obviously need more housing. Population has increased hugely in our lifetimes, and people need to have affordable homes that they can buy and raise families in. And I think the garden... I mean, before Milton Keynes, there were places like Letchworth, there were garden city suburbs. That's something from the 1930s that we've been actually quite good at, and people... I remember in government, people from abroad would be looking at...
really invested in. Wellingham City is not far from where I live, and it was really invested in with green spaces and, a 1930s approach to building in lots of ways. Have we got the money for that?
Well, that's the key. I mean, it's the way you do it. I think the idea is a good one.
Yeah.
But how you execute it is obviously going to be critically important. And what John says about infrastructure is key to this.
And what's the politics of this going to be? I mean, these new towns, they're actually not going to be being built until the next Parliament. But the government is saying right now, we are builders, not blockers. We want to expand housing, 1.5 million new houses in this Parliament. They're talking about the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, all of that land to the north of London. When it comes to it, there's going to be big planning issues in 1, 2, 3 years' time, which will be quite controversial, potentially in marginal seats.
Yeah.
Is the government going to get hit by this, or do you think public sentiment is now we want to build the homes?
I think people want to see the homes built. In my experience when I was an MP, that when the planning application goes on for new development, people always oppose it, and sometimes you can be tempted as an MP to get involved in opposing. Personally, I never did, but other MPs have taken different approaches. But in my experience, once the houses are built and the development is built, people broadly support it. So these things are always tricky when the first ideas are mooted, but I think Labour MPs want to get on with building, and I think it'll get through Parliament.
The economics of this, then, for us here today, you're much cleverer at this than all of you are much cleverer than this than me. How is it that if it doesn't get built and the shovels don't get to the ground to the next Parliament, how does it help people without homes now, first of all, and how does it generate money if the work isn't going to begin to the next Parliament? Because people need it now. The government needs growth to happen now to keep going and do all its plans.
There's two things going on. There's the new towns, which a longer-term thing, as you say, you know, then after the next election. But the government wants to get on with building 1.5 million houses
targets
now over the next 4 to 5 years.
Which will not be the new towns.
Yeah, and they're not the
separate.
new towns. There's new homes to be built.
So money comes in even before the shovel's in the ground, because you just said it'd be quicker 4 or 5 years. That's still, I don't understand how that creates money.
No, but there
now.
are two issues. The new towns issue, which is, you know, you've just said is beyond the Parliament.
Yeah.
Won't happen this Parliament. But there's an ongoing programme or ongoing...
No, I understand that.
And
I understand that. I did say I was very stupid, and I
No,
appreciate that you've gone really low. But how,
Kate,
if it's 4 to 5... Bless you. How, if in 4 to 5 years before the quicker one gets right in the ground, explain to me how that raises money for people now and creates growth now.
So the whole process starts, and then you engage a whole bunch of consultants, architects, planners.
So
kicks
they
the whole
start
thing.
getting paid,
kicks the
and
whole
that
thing.
generates
the
growth.
whole thing.
Okay, the answer is it doesn't.
Thank
There
you,
will be
Ed.
no growth from house building this year or next year, but you might start to see something happening by the very end of the Parliament. But, you know, but house building as a growth driver is a 10, 15-year plan, not a 10, 15-month plan.
But the wheels get greased at the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning,
but who
money.
feels that?
You crowd in
It's costing
investment.
money, and how does that help them find... Jonathan, how does that help them find money for all the plans that everybody's praying for in terms of the NHS and all the other things?
Well, if
in the long term.
You know, if
In the long term,
you've
but
got
now.
builders, electricians, plumbers, etc., building new houses, that's, you know, they're in
They're
good
not
work.
going to be going for 5 years. This is what
No,
I don't get.
but it is, you know, what you're doing is with growth is that you're investing in the drivers of growth, so that in the 5, 10 years your economy is much stronger. But you're right, people are struggling now with the cost of living.
That's
People are
the
struggling
problem.
now to pay the bills, and this is sort of a little bit. This is coming down the line.
So,
It's a
You
so
need
the
help now.
anger at the government is going to grow for the next 4 to 5 years. That's a problem for them politically, isn't it? Until people start to tangibly feel
true.
it.
Although you know, all the, some of the statistics for the increase in wages have been going well overall. So people's wages are going up. People are about to get a big increase in the minimum wage as well from
Mortgage
April.
rates are coming down.
Yeah, so yeah, interest rates are coming down. Mortgage
Look,
rates
you
are coming
can try
down.
and spin it in a good way, but the overall growth figure, and we'll see this with the OBR later this quarter, in the next month or two, will be revised down. And the Chancellor will almost certainly have to come to the House of Commons and open a budget where she raises taxes again. I mean, that's
right.
the strong implication.
That is exactly where we are. I think to answer Kate's point, for taking a 20-year view, new towns is a really good thing.
Yeah.
But right now, we need to build more homes. And if you are saying now in planning terms, let's get on with it, there is a chance that you're going to start to see, as you say, the builders being hired and the
Plumbers,
jobs being created
electricians.
over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years
I
as
think
the
that's what
houses come through. People might have new extensions because interest rates are coming down. But those are things which, you know, it's a slow build. It's not going to solve the growth challenge
It
in the
won't
next
solve
6 months.
the budget pressures this year.
Not immediately.
But it might do in two years before the election.
OK, well, we'll be interested to talk about that a little bit later on with Matthew Pennicott MP as well. Right, now, you've been talking to the incredible family, Mum, Dad and
That is right.
Webber this week, and they had a big moment yesterday, didn't they?
They did. We saw Emma Webber earlier in the week. She's back in with her son Charlie today. They were in Downing Street yesterday. The Prime Minister has said there will now be a statutory inquiry into the Callacane killings and the tragic deaths of their children. Of course, alongside that, we also had the report on the death of David Amos, the mistakes made in the Prevent programme. His daughter also calling for a public inquiry. But, of course, there are a number of different Prevent issues and Prevent cases. The government's not going to be able to do a public inquiry in every one of these cases, I think.
No. But it's like, you know, I come on the programme regularly, and it feels like almost every time we're on the programme, we're talking about some horrific case of either a child being killed or the situation in Nottingham or whatever. Our colleague David Amos was murdered. And so often there is a failure of public services generally associated with this. In the Nottingham case, big failures of mental health services, David Amos, and, of course, the awful case in Southport, failures around the Prevent programme, which is supposed to target and pick up and work with and deal with people who have extreme outlooks. Why does this keep happening? Why are these failures all the time in public services across the board here? And we've got to get to the bottom of it.
So, look, from my point of view, I think that there's an issue with Prevent, because clearly they identify these people, both the Southport killer and David Amos's murderer, were identified. But for whatever reason, they couldn't, you know, as their name suggests, prevent these appalling crimes. And with David Amos, I saw him about 6 weeks before he was killed. And it was a real shock. I mean, he was one of the MPs, most popular MPs, certainly on our side.
Shocking.
Very likeable, very friendly guy.
Definitely.
And, you know, I went to the funeral as well. And it was just a shocking incident, which I think could have been preventable.
Do you think it will lead to real change?
Well, let's hope the inquiry into the Nottingham case leads to real change, particularly in the way in which mental health services deals with people who have got very, very serious mental health problems. We do need to look at this Prevent programme. It may not be a judge-led inquiry. I don't know what the right mechanism is, but
the governor said that the Prevent advisor, David Anderson, is going to look at all of the past Prevent cases and draw initial conclusions. So they're not doing an individual inquiry.
No, but there's something wrong with what's going on. I mean, if they, you know, they're good enough to work out who these suspects, these people are, because they're in the programme. But then when they leave the programme, they end up killing people. So something's not working.
So you are coming back later in the show, and in particular, Jonathan, you're a patron of the of a charity, and we're going to be talking to Amelie and her mum Lucy and Callum Best, taking a letter to Downing Street urging action on children who deal with an alcoholic parent, something very close to your heart. You're about to become a patron. Tell us about the organisation.
Yeah, so it's a charity called NACOA, National Association for Children of Alcoholics. Very close to my heart, because my dad had a drink problem. He died because of his drinking. And we're taking a petition to Downing Street later today to ask for more support. And look, the thing is this, there's probably children at home right now getting ready for school, maybe watching us, whose parents are in bed either hungover or their parents drink too much, sometimes abusive as a result. That never happened to me, but the alcohol was always there. And I think the message I just want to get over to them is that there is help out there. Don't suffer in silence. There's charities like NACOA that I work with, but there's other charities as well. But we want the government to do more, to put more resource and investment